morning, everyone. Excuse the delay. Thank you and welcome to the November 22nd, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. We have a number of items coming out of committee this morning and 7 other discussion items today. I would ask commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments so we can move through the agenda efficiently. We start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on any items that are not contained on the agenda today? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to committee report. There were 3 items that appeared on the Committee of the Whole's November 17th, 2022 agenda. I will ask Vice Chair Miller for an update on these items.
Still trying to connect to pull everything up. But I can see, okay, we had 3 items on the Committee of the Whole meeting last Thursday. There was the Southeast Special Area Study Report and comprehensive plan amendments and 1 rezoning case in that study area, and then a 3rd unrelated rezoning case. That 3rd case, Z5222 on Globe Road, we reviewed and we voted unanimously to pass it to the full Planning Commission with a recommendation of approval. The Southeast Special Study Area, the deadline for action is February 15th, and we have voted to hold that item at the table, or move to hold that item at the table at the Committee of the Whole, and for the rezoning case Z1620, that in that same special study area, the deadline for action for that item is in January. So we have, since there's no Committee of the Whole meeting in December, we voted to try to keep that and the special study report together. So we have voted to ask council for an extension of 60 days on that rezoning case. And I believe the council has 1 additional meeting before our December Planning Commission meeting, so they can vote at that time whether to grant that extension. And if they do not, then we can hear it at the December Planning Commission meeting.
Excellent. So do we have a motion to ask for an extension for Z1620 Hodge Road assemblage?
Thank you. So with that, I will make a motion with respect to case Z1620 to request an additional 60-day extension to that deadline.
And do we have a second? Commissioner Otwell offers a second. Any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Sure, apologies. Thank you very much. Okay. So Commissioner Miller has made a motion to recommend a 60-day extension to Z1620. Commissioner Otwell has offered a second. By show of hands, those in support of the time extension? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. And with the next rezoning case, Z5222 Globe Road, pursuant to the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole, I move to approve case Z5222 and to adopt the consistency statement included in today's agenda materials.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Raines. Commissioner Miller has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z5222. Commissioner Raines has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in support and any opposed, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. There is 1 item that was on our consent agenda, that is Z2422. I believe that item will be moved to our December 13th Planning Commission meeting. Without objection, we defer that meeting. We would defer that to the December 13th meeting to allow additional conditions to be crafted. Now moving on to old business. There are 4 items listed under old business today, some of which have appeared on previous agendas but were not discussed, so we will hear a full staff presentation, applicant presentation, and hear from members of the public. For items that have been previously discussed, we will begin with a short update from staff focusing on revisions to the request. The first item, E.1, which is rezoning Z1721 on East Whitaker Mill Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 17.96 acres from a mix of residential mixed-use 4 stories, commercial mixed-use 3 stories, and residential 10 to residential mixed-use 4 stories conditional use, neighborhood mixed-use 5 stories conditional use, and residential mixed-use 3 stories conditional use. This case previously appeared on the October 27 Committee of the Whole agenda and the November 8th Planning Commission agenda, but was not discussed. So we will start with the staff presentation from J.P. Mansolf.
Thank you, and good morning, Commission. This request is to rezone nearly 18 acres at the corner of East Whitaker Mill Road and Bernard Street, currently the site of the Oaks at Mayview senior living facility. So the site is, like I said, at the corner of Bernard Street and East Whitaker Mill Road. Surrounding zoning is generally residential, as you can see on the map. The site itself is sort of a node of mixed-use zoning in the middle of this residential area. And the request is for 3 different zoning districts that don't exactly align with the property lines, so just wanting to show those 3 districts here on the map. So the RX3 and NX5 districts kind of extend a little bit further west than the property boundary line, so just kind of wanted to show that here. Here's an aerial of the site. So directly to the west is the 5 Points Center for Active Adults, large areas of low-scale residential, and further west, east, along East Whitaker Mill Road is the East End Market PD, which was recently approved in 2021, and the Raleigh Ironworks development that is currently under construction and pending, or the pending rezoning, which we will see at the next meeting, which is case C2422. Here's a couple of views of the site. This one is looking north from Whitaker Mill Road, and looking northeast from the Bernard Whitaker Mill intersection. Proposed conditions, there are 6. Condition 1 would limit non-residential uses to 28,500 square feet. Residential dwelling units would be limited to 470 and would be age restricted, so only persons 55 and older could reside in the dwelling units, and with one exception for skilled nursing care units, and so the skilled nursing care units would not apply to that total unit limit. Condition 2 requires 3 crosswalks with median refuges would be constructed subject to Raleigh Department of Transportation approval, and there's an exhibit that I'll show on the next slide that kind of shows where those general locations would be. Condition 3 sort of works to mimic some aspects of the parking limited frontage, so it would require a maximum 120-foot setback from East Whitaker Mill Road that is a little bit larger than the maximum of 100 feet that parking limited allows, and then a maximum 90-foot setback from Bernard Street. And then that condition also limits parking in between East Whitaker Mill Road and the development, and also Bernard Street and the development. Here's that exhibit that I mentioned, just showing the 3 locations of the required pedestrian refuge islands and crosswalks. Condition 4 would increase block perimeter to 5,700 linear feet. The current block perimeter of the site is about 5,600 feet, and so that essentially would exempt the site from block perimeter standards and not require a connection, which looking at the site would probably be required sort of north to south, and so that would eliminate the requirement to meet block perimeter standards, or it would increase the block perimeter standard to 5,700 feet. Condition 5 would require a landscape buffer along the northern property line of 1933 Bernard Street, which is the property that is directly adjacent to existing townhomes. And condition 6 would prohibit several uses that are otherwise allowed in the neighborhood mixed-use district. Looking at the existing versus proposed zoning, the request would actually decrease entitlement on the site. So the maximum number of units would decrease to 470 from 755. And office and retail would also be more limited with the conditions that were included in the request. The site has a higher walk score than the city average, but similar bike and transit scores to that city average. Smaller units would be allowed, and the site has lower transportation costs and higher job proximity than the city average. There is currently bus service to the site via Raleigh Route 2, which currently provides 30-minute service to the site. The request would limit the number of housing units allowed on the site from the existing zoning. It doesn't include any subsidized units, but it would provide a variety of housing types, smaller lots than the city average, and it is within walking distance of transit. The site census tract has a lower people of color population than the city average and lower low-income population than the city average, but rent has increased in the site census tract, but at a similar rate to the city average. So the requested RX4 CU, RX3 CU, and NX5 CU is inconsistent with the future land use map overall. There are some minor inconsistencies with the moderate scale residential future land use map designation, which would recommend conditions that would sort of break up the massing and scale of housing or apartment buildings in a RX district. And then the neighborhood mixed use designation here would recommend 4 stories, and the request is for 5 stories, so a little bit taller than what would be recommended. So those inconsistencies sort of lead to the overall inconsistency with the future land use map. No frontage is included with the request. There are some conditions that mimic some aspects of the parking limited frontage, but the site is within a frequent transit area on the urban form map, which would recommend an urban frontage, and that is not included in the request, so it's inconsistent with the urban form map. Overall, the request is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. Some consistent policies, so it would focus development in an already established area, leading to a more compact development pattern overall. It does allow a variety of housing types and would allow for a space for aging residents to sort of stay in place in this area. Again, inconsistent with the future land use map as reflected in policy LU 1.2. There are some policies here that speak to the elimination of that street connection with the increase of the block perimeter standards. So not having that connection would be inconsistent with several policies regarding connectivity, eliminating gaps in the street network, and pedestrian and bicycle network connectivity. There are 2 urban design policies that are speak to the lack of frontage where it's recommended at this site. And then H 2.7 acknowledges that the RHTC did review this request and recommended approval, but did specify that there are conditions that can be included to ensure that development is more compatible with some of the adjacent historic property. So just recognizing that through that policy. If approved, the request would trigger an amendment to the future land use map shown here. And your deadline for action is December 26th. Again, one outstanding issue, it was noted in the staff report that there are multiple documented complaints of flooding and severe stream bank erosion within the drainage area downstream of the site. So additional zoning conditions that require higher levels of stormwater control would help mitigate that issue. With that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, JP. Madam Chair and Planning Commission members, my name is Beth Trejos. I'm an attorney with Nelson Mullins, 301 Hillsborough Street. I am here today with Tyler Arnold from Pruitt Health, Don Curry from Curry Engineering, and Bryce Jennings and Jason Kimball from Foley Design, the project architects. And we are requesting the rezoning of the existing Oaks at Whitaker Glen Retirement Facility. And the purpose of the zoning request is to extend the continuum of care at this existing facility. We would update some of the existing facilities, provide additional skilled nursing care and more independent living units to meet demand in this area. In terms of land use, what we are proposing, all of the proposed uses, in fact, are permitted today under the existing zoning. Of course, we are requesting a height increase at the corner from 4 to 5 stories, but the topography on the site is cooperative in that it's kind of a bowl. So at Whitaker Mill, the 5-story building will only appear to be 4 stories and will fit in with the roof lines of the planned buildings for the broader site. This is really a downzoning in the terms that we're adding conditions that don't exist today to restrict the uses and to provide certainty to our neighbors. Many of the changes that we propose are happening now because they are permitted under the existing zoning. For instance, the independent living buildings at the rear that exist today have been renovated, and there is also pending a site plan for a pool in the center of those independent living buildings. This existing facility was built a long time ago, and before the city of Raleigh had stormwater requirements. So, as a part of the redevelopment, we will of course bring the site up to the city code requirements. The zoning has sort of 2 primary purposes. One is to provide the amendment to the block perimeter so that we are not required to make a street connection between East Whitaker Mill and Mill Street. This is something that Pruitt Health feels strongly about because this is a senior living facility with a fragile population. There's memory care here, and as we've all lived through a pandemic, we know how important it can be to limit access to fragile populations in difficult times. We also heard from our residents and from our neighbors that they likewise did not want to see a street connection. And so we have sort of tried to balance, the requirements of the code and the comprehensive plan and the desires of the community. We have tried to provide a public benefit by allowing, building crosswalks and pedestrian refuges, 3 that are largely off-site to facilitate movement in the broader community. We plan, there's existing sidewalk on Whitaker Mill, and sidewalk will be installed on Bernard Street as a part of our project. That is the city code section for Bernard Street. We are also asking that we not be required to build the buildings so close to East Whitaker Mill and Bernard Street. As you can see from this aerial, the existing building is set back quite a distance from the street, as is the adjacent historic Wake County home. We propose on Whitaker Mill to bring the buildings within 120 feet of Whitaker Mill. That will allow us to maintain a more of a park-like frontage. It will allow us to preserve an existing very large maple along the frontage. And that was one of the comments we got from the community. I think there were concerns that this would look very urban, and that was seen as undesirable. In particular, somebody said the buildings that exist today are not prominent, and that was something that they preferred to see. So here again, with our setbacks on Whitaker Mill and Bernard, we've tried to balance the comprehensive plan and the desires of the community and our residents. And I would say the additional setbacks with allowance for some parking and some drive aisles also allow our seniors to drive around all the buildings so that they can get to the entrance that's closest to where they need to be, which is important for folks that might have limited mobility. That is our general proposal. As I've said, we have tried to do a balancing act between what the comprehensive plan recommends and what our residents and neighbors would like to see. We do have on a PowerPoint all of our architectural plans and our proposed site plan, which are not conditions of our case, but which are very far along in the process, which we'd be happy to share with you if that's appropriate. But I know you have a long agenda, and so we'll let you tell us what you want to see.
You have 4 minutes and 53 seconds left, so please feel free.
Okay. JP, can you help me with the, yep, and Bryce or... If we have 4 minutes for you to prepare these.
Okay, I'll do my best. Okay, well, you guys are familiar with the existing site. Can I use this as a pointer? Can you guys see that? Okay, so we talked about the existing buildings in the back. She just mentioned the pool, proposed pool building that we're talking about doing. But everything on this left side is really considered independent living. The right side is this AL building, which we're talking about is technically will appear like a 4-story building, but is a 5-story building because it steps down the hill towards the back. And then we really considered the skilled nursing building. You know, it's starting to get closer to the neighborhood in the back, so we stepped it down to 3 stories. It was very important to us to consider our neighbors and make sure that we addressed their concerns as well. And then in the back towards Mill Street, we had even smaller pieces of townhomes proposed back there, so more of a residential look. Let's see, we also talked about, do I just click to go to the next? These 2 site sections really show you what Beth talked about earlier, that there's a lot of grade that happens on our site. So this top one, it shows Whitaker Mill on the left, the little gatehouse, and then you can see how the site steps down as it goes back towards Mill Street. And so you can see how from the street you really don't get a full view of the taller building. Yep, there we go. We really tried to pay attention to local context, so we went around these are all pictures from the neighborhood surrounding that we took as good solutions, and our owner wanted to kind of go down this path for character, so we're trying to fit in within the community. This is a rendering of what we already did on the existing towers, which was trying to kind of go into that, take some things from Modern Farmhouse and French Country Modern, and that's sort of the context for the entire site. This is a rendering of the pool and pool amenity building that we're talking about putting in, so you can see how it all fits in. That's Whitaker, shot from Whitaker Mill, the gatehouse entry into the site. This is the corner of Bernard and Whitaker Mill. This is what we're saying is it's a 5-story building, but appears like a 4-story building from Whitaker Mill. And it steps down. In the background, you see the smaller skilled care building in the back, going back towards those townhomes. So this is the skilled care building down Bernard Street. You get a little glimpse on the right side of the existing towers. This is the townhomes on Mill Street. That was it. Did I make my time? Okay, that was quick. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. We'd appreciate your support.
Thank you very much. Are there any members of the public here to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, I will move to questions and comments from commissioners. Would anyone like to start off with some questions or comments? Commissioner Raines?
Thank you. One of the comments or one of the issues that was pointed out in the staff report was stormwater downstream. I didn't see anything in the conditions that would improve or rise above the standard UDO requirements for stormwater. So I was going to ask staff if they had any additional thoughts on that, recommendations, and possibly green alternatives.
Believe stormwater staff is nearby. Should be here, I assume, soon. Generally, what we see in conditions could be an expansion of the type of storm that's treated. So right now UDO requires 2 and 10 year. They could expand that to 25, 50, 100 year. There are other stormwater solutions like green stormwater infrastructure that would provide a more natural way to treat stormwater prior to being discharged into a stormwater system. I would lean on stormwater staff to provide some more details about what potential conditions could address those concerns, but those are just things that I've seen from other cases.
I'll wait to comment later if they come back, but I would like to see some level of treatment above the UDO, especially with the amount of impervious paving and buildings that are on the site. I'd like to see if this applicant would be amenable to adding a condition for that. And one other question related to transit bike lanes. I may have missed it, but was there any recommendations to add bike lanes along this Whitaker Mill zone?
I believe that's in the street cross section, but I would defer to transportation for confirmation.
Jason Myers, Transportation. What JP said is correct. They are in the street standards. Very recently, the city has installed a bike lane on Whitaker Mill in that stretch of street through a resurfacing project this last year. So there might be some small modifications and improvements to meet the standard of the street for the frontage if there was a Tier 3 site plan, but there is already a bikeway in place there.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Otwell, did you have a question? Or did you have a follow-up, Commissioner Rains?
Just a comment, I think this type of use is much needed in this area, so I'm glad to see potential expansion. And I do appreciate that, I understand that the urban frontage is a consideration, but with the height of the buildings and the nature of the surrounding context, I actually I like the setback that they're approving, or that they're recommending for it, so.
I agree, thank you. Commissioner Otwell, did you have a question?
I'd like to support your comment that I think this kind of use is important, and I'd like to see more of it here. I noticed the staff report mentioned that it's possible for redevelopment to occur through a recombination and avoid putting a sidewalk in on Bernard Street. And I noticed the rendering from the applicant lacks a sidewalk on Bernard Street. I was wondering if the applicant could speak to that. Is there any kind of guarantee that the sidewalk will be built at redevelopment?
We do intend to build a sidewalk. It hadn't occurred to us that there was a process that could exist where we would not be required to build a sidewalk, but it is a part of the cross-section for Bernard Street. This is Don Curry, our engineer, who can confirm our plan.
Thank you, Don Curry, Curry Engineering, 205 South Fuquay Avenue in Fuquay Varina. Yes, we are in fact planning to install the sidewalk on Bernard. There's an existing sidewalk at the north end that we'll be connecting to, and we'll be connecting to the sidewalk at the intersection of East Whitaker Mill and Bernard as well, which is part of the required street section along Bernard, is my
The
understanding.
staff report mentioned that recombination could occur, so there wouldn't actually be any frontage along Bernard Street. And so it'd be really great to see a condition that formally stated that the sidewalk would be built.
Yeah, as I said, that hadn't occurred to us as an option because we weren't planning that, but we can confirm if needed that we intend to build a sidewalk.
Wonderful. I'd also like to say that I am concerned about the urban frontage at this spot. I think it's an emerging walkable and pedestrian area. I understand wanting to get automobile access to our seniors in this location, but I'd also like to consider that a lot of our seniors lose the ability to drive, and putting them behind several bays of parking between them and the transit would reduce the utility of transit in the area and the utility of transit for the folks staying here. I also have an issue with the block perimeter reduction. I don't think it's appropriate to seal our vulnerable populations off. They're a part of our community, and I'd like to see them integrated just as fully. I mean, I'd love to see at least like a compromise on a pedestrian access through the site. I think that would help with bike connectivity and pedestrian connectivity. Unless I see some commitment to a condition for the connectivity through the road and the sidewalk, I don't think I'll be able to support this.
Thank you, Commissioner Otwell. Has the applicant considered conditions related to bicycle pedestrian connection, north-south, from Mills to Whitaker Mill?
We have, our concern on this site is that it is a campus that we would like to be able to control access because of the fragile population. We have tried to create a public benefit in terms of connectivity with what are really off-site improvements with the pedestrian access points. we could also offer a commitment for, confirmation of sidewalk on Mill Street, and certainly would on Bernard as well, so that there would be that opportunity for a connection, or perhaps even pay a fee in lieu to the city for construction of an access point on the adjacent parcel that is owned by the county. And I guess the city has some rights to it with the Five Points Center. But we are really concerned from a public health perspective to maintaining control of our site, given what we've all just been through.
I'd like to also follow up. I'd love to see if you could amend the frontage conditions, at least for the corner. I understand the strong desire to keep the buildings back. I disagree with it. I'd love to see the good frontage up front for this area, but at least on the corner where there's going to be mixed use and it's going to be right up on a busy corner and it's not going to be as many residential units there, I'd like to see that urban form preserved.
Go ahead, Commissioner O'Haver.
I'd like to follow up with staff on the block perimeter, and it's probably in the staff report. Sorry if I missed it, but what street type, Jason, would be required if the block perimeter were instituted?
Your question is what type of street would be required if there was a trigger to build a street through the site? I think that there's many ways that could be met, and there's a lot of flexibility from the developer to choose what they'd want to do. I think the easiest way would be to convert the existing driveway that roughly follows the western border of this zoning district or proposed zoning district into a public street, and they would only need to do half of that. The other half of that right-of-way would be dedicated if there were a development on the county property side of things, and it would probably be a neighborhood yield. So a 20-foot of pavement, curb and gutter on their side, sidewalk on their side, and then dedicate up to their property line and have an obligation to the neighboring property owner. That's maybe the most simple way, given the existing site design, that is least impactful, but there is a lot of flexibility. Could do something else. But there's probably no reason to do more than a neighborhood yield, because we wouldn't expect there to be on-street parking in the public right-of-way here.
Okay, thank you. And then, can the applicant pull the site plan back up? I agree with Commissioner Otwell I agree with both Commissioner Otwell and Commissioner Raines. Initially, when discussed, I felt like the urban frontage I could support because of the context of the existing site and the adjacent site. But I agree, parking between the buildings and the street where there's bus service, perhaps that street could then provide access there. I do have some concerns about the urban frontage, just mostly because the parking's there, and I agree that we need to have better connectivity to the street where the bus service is. So that's just a comment. I don't know that I have any questions. Ms. Trejos, I just wanted you to pull that back up so I could look at the site plan, so thank you.
Seems as if we are going to request the applicant consider conditions related to sidewalks on Mills and Bernard, some additional stormwater or green infrastructure components, and some better connection along the corner with Bernard that may address the urban frontage. Are there any additional comments from commissioners?
I just wanted to add that stormwater staff is here if there are additional questions on the stormwater aspect.
Sure. Commissioner Raines, did you want to re-ask your question of stormwater?
Actually, I think I'd like to rephrase it and send it to the applicant to ask them to apply some sort of stormwater treatment or design that is above the UDO, especially with looking at the site plan. That's not part of the application, but there's a lot of impervious features there. So I'd ask the applicant to provide something above UDO and preferably with some sort of green infrastructure treatment.
And would the applicant like additional time to address some of those concerns raised by the commission?
We will absolutely, take the time to consider the comments that are made. I think in terms of the frontage, based on discussions with our residents in particular, there is a desire for parking in close proximity to all of the buildings, and so I think we may have some difficulties there, but we will certainly look to see what we can do, particularly at the corner. And we will, we are committed to providing improvements with regard to walkability, and so we will look at those items and come back to you with some additional conditions.
Okay, our next meeting, I believe, is December 13. In order to make that deadline, does that require signed conditions this Friday? But do we have a holiday this Friday, or is it still, okay. They can submit electronically, okay.
Okay.
Okay. If we're not able to make that deadline, then I believe you would be on consent December 13, and you would show up on the subsequent meeting after that.
Okay, all right. We
Okay.
will do our best.
All right.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much. Without objection, we are deferring that case Z1721 to our next meeting. Next item on the agenda is E.2, which is case Z4122 on Old Milburnie Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 11.76 acres from residential 4 with special highway overlay district 1 to residential mixed use 4 stories conditional use with special highway overlay district 1. This case previously appeared on the October 27 Committee of the Whole agenda and November 8 Planning Commission agenda, but was not discussed. So we will start with a staff presentation from JP Mansoff.
Thank you. So Z4122 is a request to rezone 11.76 acres on 2 properties from R4 to RX4 CU. Your deadline for action is December 26th. So this is sort of at the edge of our jurisdiction and surrounding areas predominantly zoned residential with some agricultural zoning in the area as well. Directly to the east is Knightdale's planning jurisdiction, and that site to the east does have an approved master plan for a large residential community. Here's an aerial of the site, again showing the jurisdiction of Knightdale in relation to Raleigh's jurisdiction. This is just outside of the 540, Interstate 540. Surrounding areas generally agricultural or some larger lot residential uses. There's a couple of views of the site just showing that it's currently vacant. There are 2 conditions included in the request. So residential density cannot exceed 25 units per acre, and principal uses are limited to single unit living, 2-unit living, and multi-unit living. So essentially removing some of the commercial uses as a principal use from the residential mixed use district. Looking at the existing versus proposed entitlement, the residential density would increase, and then residential density would increase as would the number of units on the site. As I noted, this site is kind of at the edge of our jurisdiction, so lower walk, bike, and transit scores than the city average. Average transportation costs here, but lower job proximity, so this is sort of further out and away from some of the closer in amenities and transportation options. No bus service to the site. The request would add to the housing supply, does not include subsidized units, would permit a variety of housing types and smaller units and lots than the citywide average. It is not within walking distance of any transit. Area residents are more likely to be people of color than the city average, and housing costs in this area have increased at a rate slower than the city average. The requested RX4 district is inconsistent with the low-scale residential future land use map designation, which generally recommends R4 or R6 and sort of lower, smaller scale types of housing. And so this, the height and the sort of massing of buildings would be inconsistent with this designation. The request is along Parkway Corridor, which is 540, and the retaining the Special Highway Overlay District would require a 50-foot buffer along 540, and that's consistent with the urban form map recommendation of Parkway Corridor. The request is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. Some consistent policies speak to on the site itself, the request would allow a more compact development pattern, allow a greater variety of housing and additional housing, and would maintain the forested buffer along 540. But the request is inconsistent with the future land use map, inconsistent with the policy that says for newly annexed land that the zoning should be consistent with the future land use map, and the request is also inconsistent with the policy that says that we should reduce vehicle miles traveled, as this site is generally, as I mentioned, at the edge of the jurisdiction with not a lot of surrounding commercial or other amenities, which would require additional driving for residents here. Deadline for action is December 26th, and no outstanding issues have been identified. And there's one more meeting before that deadline on December 13th. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Next, we will hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of the Commission. I'm Mark Frederick with Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein at 301 Fayetteville Street, here on behalf of the applicant. Before discussing the requested zoning designation, I'd like to provide some context that should help inform you of why we've submitted this rezoning application. First, the Raleigh Street Plan identifies the realignment of several roads in the area. The rezoning site is highlighted in yellow near the center of this aerial. As you can see, it is wedged between Old Mill Bernie Road and 540. The site will eventually become isolated once Forestville Road is realigned. That realignment will see Forestville Road intersect with 540 and extend to the Skycrest Drive extension. These improvements, well, I'll also note that that Forestville Road realignment will also coincide with NCDOT's plans for an interchange with 540 just north of the site. These improvements will drastically improve connectivity for this site, both to downtown Raleigh via Skycrest Drive, as well as the larger triangle area via 540. This will also place the rezoning site on an island with 540 to the west, Old Mill Bernie Road to the east, and Forestville Road to the north. This will create a natural transition to the surrounding properties. In addition, the area to the east of 540, as well as the property directly adjacent to the east of this rezoning site, is rapidly changing with additional residential density coming to the area. Okay, well, this slide was supposed to have the master plan for Allen Park, which is the I'll go back to actually. So the Allen Park community is a master plan community directly east across Old Mill Bernie Road on the Old Wilmore Golf Course. That community will have over 600 residential units, both single family detached and townhome units. That community is currently under the going through construction plan review process with Nightdale. The first phase does include about 100 units along Old Mill Bernie Road. So in combination with the realignment of the roads in the area and the additional residential uses in the area, we really saw this site as an opportunity to provide additional residential units and also a type of product that is not available currently in the area. So this request is consistent with various housing policies, the expanding housing choices vision theme, and the urban form map, and it is in the public interest. Also, in the lead up to this meeting, we did receive some initial feedback and concern about prohibiting non-residential uses. We have considered this, and we are prepared to remove that condition if that is the direction the Commission would like us to take. We would ask that the case is deferred so we can resubmit signed conditions if that is the direction we hear today. and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Just want to check in. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Okay. Seeing none, I'll open up for questions and comments from commissioners. Commissioner Rains?
Thank you. In this case, the RX prohibits commercial use, and you made a comment that this is kind of an island currently in this area. I guess I would just recommend the applicant remove that prohibition so that potential commercial uses could be applied to this area that currently is underserved.
Thank you. And any additional follow-up? Commissioner Bennett?
Just a question. You mentioned the approved development across Old Mill Bernie. Is that all residential?
No, I actually did forget to mention, there is a node of commercial, neighborhood scale commercial uses proposed along the eastern edge of Old Mill Bernie Road directly across from the rezoning site, yes.
Okay. In that case, I would support Commissioner Rain's request to remove the condition, the prohibition on non-residential. I think that's the only concern I had.
Agreed, mine as well. Any additional comments from commissioners? Sounds as if you would like the opportunity to defer the case to perhaps remove prohibition on commercial?
Yes, we would appreciate that opportunity.
Okay. Do we need to ask for additional time? We're okay. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. I've had some clarification. The deadline to revise zoning conditions is actually next Friday for anyone else who may still be in the audience. Okay, thank you. So you do have some time to be able to make our December 13th meeting. Okay. All right. Without objection, we are deferring Z41 2022 to our December 13th meeting to allow additional work on the conditions removing the prohibition on commercial. Moving on to the next item, item E.3, which is case Z6421 on Bailiwick Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 10.8 acres from Wake County's Residential 40 Watershed District to Raleigh's Residential 1 Conditional Use with Special Highway Overlay District 1 and Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District. This case previously appeared on the October 27 Committee of the Whole agenda and the November 8th Planning Commission agenda, but was not discussed. So we will start with a staff presentation from Ira Mabel.
Good morning, everyone. Ira Mabel, Planning Development. Your deadline for this request is the day after Christmas. So this site currently is not in the city or in the city's ETJ, which means it does have Wake County zoning. There is a annexation petition that's been filed that will go at the same time. So theoretically, both would be, or the annexation petition will be approved for the zoning to be applied. But this is around the northern limit of the City of Raleigh jurisdiction in the area. I think we don't have any jurisdiction north of 540 in general. So just sort of orientation of the site, sort of near Six Forks and Strickland, if that's a helpful intersection there. On Bailiwick Road, between Bailiwick and 540. A little bit of a closer view of the site. So this is the Magellan School, which is the owner and applicant. And this is a photo of the watershed. So generally, that FWPOD overlay happens every time there is City of Raleigh zoning, and the Wake County equivalent is that W on the R40W for watershed. So very, very similar rules apply to both. A photo of the site. This is the existing drive into the Magellan School, which is the neighbor to the west. So conditions on the case, number 1 is basically saying there will only be a school here. 2 is a maximum height of 3 stories, which is redundant with code, but maximum height. A buffer of basically new things from 540 of 500 feet, which is a pretty good portion of the depth. A requirement for green stormwater infrastructure. So there's the FWPOD has a provision if the built area of the site is 24% or higher, they have to do extra or specific stormwater mitigations. This is saying they'll do it no matter what. There's a 15-foot landscape buffer on the one property on Bailiwick that is still going to be in Wake County that's not in the request. A condition about cross-access, and then increasing block perimeter so that to eliminate the requirement basically for a public street stub here. So this table is pretty weird. There's, like I say, condition number 1 prohibits everything but a school use. And school is a special use permit in Wake County, so not guaranteed entitlement. Although you can have a school in an R40W, but they would have to go through a permit process. So pretty low on the walk-in transit and bike score, just given the infrastructure on Bailiwick, mostly in the 540. And no housing means no affordability. So just skip that slide. And yeah, most of this part of the city is still a mixture of Wake County and watershed, so large lot residential for the most part. Not until you get to the further south in the Raleigh jurisdiction is there other types of uses. So there's no flume designation. The staff report does call this inconsistent, although it is hard to be either consistent or inconsistent with nothing. The recommendation, should this be approved, is an institutional use, which is what is on the Magellan School currently. And also on the YMCA down here. Which is that slide. So just sort of bringing the blue color further onto the entirety of their site. But the SHOD 2 is consistent with the urban form of the Parkway corridor, and is inconsistent with the comp plan. I'll spend a little bit of time here. So all things being equal, the comp plan does say an R1 is appropriate zoning in the watershed. That's most of the other zoning, if you go back to that map, in the watershed is R1 with the Falls Lake overlay. So the request in and of itself is not inconsistent with any of that. Really, the inconsistency comes down to should this be in the city at all? So the request for rezoning, if this were in the city, R1 with conditions in the Falls Lake would be totally consistent with everything. So the question is really the expansion of city limits in this part of the county, which is addressed by these particular policies. And again, you have one more meeting this year to discuss this. Be happy to answer any questions before you hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Mabel. Next, we will hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Oh, sure.
Good morning again, Madam Chair and members of the Planning Commission. Beth Trejos, Nelson Mullins, 301 Hillsborough Street, here today on behalf of Magellan Charter School. I've got with me Brian Purdy and Hunter Freeman from McAdams. And let me sort of go back so we're looking at something while we're, let's find the zoning map. So with this zoning, Magellan is just seeking to utilize the property that they own adjacent to their existing school as a part of the school campus. Property on 3 sides of this site are in the city limits and are zoned R1 conditional use with the Falls overlay and the SHOD, just as we propose for this site. The reason Magellan would like to be in the city limits and would like to utilize this site just as they utilize their existing site is because it allows them to have city utilities and only one agency doing review. You can imagine for a charter school that is run largely by volunteers, this would be a difficult task to coordinate between Wake County, where the school use is permitted with a special use permit, and the city. Of course, in the county, they would have to have a septic system in the watershed, and they would have to utilize wells, which seems less than desirable, particularly given that the existing school site has utilities right next door. And let me find this picture. Let's see, I don't know if I can, right there, this is the existing school site here. This is the property that's proposed to be rezoned. Right in the center of it, along the right-of-way, is a fire hydrant. So, there are utilities on that site today, right in the right-of-way. Obviously, the Magellan School was permitted to develop in the city, as was the Y MCA, which is just down the road. And so we think it makes sense for this piece to also be in the city. And the city recognizes that there is a difference between the broader watershed and properties that are in this crescent area, sort of between Strickland Road and 540. And in fact, the city adopted an annexation policy in 2009 that specifically allows areas between I-540 and Strickland Falls of Neuse Road to become a part of the city where the development meets the watershed requirements. And they also identify, properties such as this that are located adjacent to the contiguous city limits of Raleigh and that are adjacent to or in close proximity to Raleigh water and sewer to be brought into the city. So this meets those two of those items that are listed in that piece that's designed to address this unique crescent area. And it would bring them in line with their neighbors. So Magellan is offering conditions that are above and beyond the code requirements, obviously limiting the use to a school. They own it, they're going to use it for that purpose. They have committed to green stormwater infrastructure, no matter how much impervious area is built. And they have committed to a 500-foot separation between uses and 540, which is the area closest to the watershed. So, we would submit to you that it just makes sense to bring this donut hole into the city and subject it to the stringent watershed requirements that you have enacted. Several weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I sent y'all letters from the charter school itself, as well as MAP, which is their PTA organization in support of this zoning request. And of course, there are many parents of Magellan Charter School students who support this. And you may have heard from some of them, but we would ask for your support to sort of cure this donut hole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I want to check if there are members of the public who wish to speak on this item. Seeing none, I'll open for questions and comments from commissioners. Personally, I have no questions on this one. I'm generally in support.
I agree. I'm plan on supporting this request, but I think that this would be one of those cases where it'd be nice to know about the revenue balance of bringing this into the city, with what the services would cost versus the tax revenue it would bring in. Oftentimes, these large sites can be a financial drain on city services, but it would be great to quantify that. Just a general comment, I plan on voting for this.
Thank you, Commissioner Otwell. If there are no additional questions or comments, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I move to approve, I'm sorry, this keeps going down, case Z4122, and to adopt the approved consistency statement contained in today's agenda materials. 6421, excuse me, yes.
Excellent. Vice Chair Miller has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z6421 on Bailiwick Road. Do we have a second? Second. Thank you. From Commissioner Bennett. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in support and any opposed, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item E.4, which is case Z6822 on West Jones Street and North Boylan Avenue. This is a request to rezone approximately 0.87 acres from office and residential mixed-use 3 stories detached frontage with North Boylan Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District to office and residential mixed-use 7 stories with Transit Overlay District. No zoning conditions are proposed with this request. Great. We discussed this item at our November 8th meeting where we deferred to allow the applicant to consider adding zoning conditions. New conditions limit the height on West Jones Street as long as the existing residential use at 626 West Jones Street is present. We have previously heard from the applicant and allowed public comment, so we will start with an update from JP Mansolf.
So just noting the deadline is December 24th here. At the last meeting, there was a request to see a map just of the different heights in the area, so just wanted to show this. Generally, the blue is going to be a 3-story district with the one exception adjacent to the site, sort of catty corner, is a 7-story district. And then further south, you'll see some 12 and 7-story districts. And then for the downtown mixed-use portion, along Glenwood, you'll see a mix of heights from 40 down to 7, down to 3. So just wanted to note that the adjacent heights in the area. Since the case was last discussed, a new condition has been added that would limit the height at the 628 West Jones Street property within 85 feet of West Jones Street to 3 stories and 50 feet if the existing residential use at 626 West Jones Street is present. And this is sort of what that looks like. So 628 is at the corner, and that's included in the request. The maximum height would be limited to 3 stories and 50 feet as long as the residential use on the adjacent 626 West Jones Street property, which is not included in the request, remains present. And so if that property were to be removed, demolished, or preserved and moved, that condition would no longer apply, and the height on that on the corner property could go up to 7 stories, as is the case on the rest of the site. Just as a reminder, it's consistent with the comprehensive plan overall, the future land use map, and urban form map. And no outstanding issues have been identified. And again, your deadline is December 24th. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. I did want to check in because there are a number of people in the audience today. Were there members of the public who wished to speak on this item? Okay. We would need to vote with a 2/3 approval to hear additional time from both the applicant and members of the public. Would someone like to motion?
I'll motion to hear additional input from the applicant and the community.
Okay. And do we have a second? Okay. And by show of hands, those in support of allowing an additional 6 minutes to both sides, and any opposed, that motion passes unanimously. So if the applicant would like to speak for an additional 6 minutes, we will get that on the clock. And then members of the public, if you want to get ready to speak on this item, please queue up.
Good morning. Glad to be back here. Jess Brandis, Senior Director of Real Estate Development with CASA. Just wanted to reiterate really what JP said about the addition of that condition that we've proposed. We selected that particularly because it's focusing on that corner, and so it's sort of limiting the height and the density to what's pretty much already allowed there, and thought that corner was the best way to address some of our neighbors' concerns at 626 because it sort of addresses it from both the front and from that side. I also wanted to share, we've had conversations with our neighbor and also with staff about the potential for additional conditions. We didn't meet the deadline to get those officially submitted, but we're considering adding these for our city council review. And those would be, the first would be for a 6-foot setback from the building line. Currently, there's no setback required. This would be for the property line that shares a boundary with our property from the 626 parcel. And then a second condition that would add add that for any height over 3 stories or over 50 feet, we'd have a additional 6-foot step back. And we'd also assume those would have that same condition built into them as the one that is before you today, where it exists as long as there's an existing residential use at the 626 parcel. I will add, we asked the city to do a envision analysis of the proposal, or excuse me, the condition that we did include. And their estimation there was that that condition that's before you today would decrease the total number of units allowed from our original rezoning request by about 15%. We have not asked them to do any sort of analysis on the other 2 conditions that we're in conversation about. That's it for me.
Thank you very much. We may have some questions as we begin discussion. So if we want to reset the clock, if members of the public would wish to speak.
Good morning, members of the Planning Commission. Chad Wilkins, 919 West South Street. I'm in the middle of the donut, so I'm back. It's good to see you guys again. I wanted to kind of take where we were, look at what the new proposals are, and kind of re-envision maybe some other options. So starting with where we were 2 weeks ago. So obviously I'm the green guy in the middle here. I figured out actually how to label, since I'm not the pro at this. So this is what 7 stories, 90 feet would look around the house. Now, this is on the lot lines. It's no setback. So that's kind of where we are. And then the new proposal is essentially this, which is 50 feet high on the 628 West Jones Street on the left-hand side here, I guess. I guess that would be the west side. And then everything else would still be at the 7-story range. Of course, it can still go up, I guess, to 11 with the TOD, but I'm only addressing what is at the 7. So what I kind of wanted to do is kind of zoom out here a little bit, look at the space again, and just kind of go through some different options here. So right here in the middle, you can see where Boylan's kind of running on the left side of the screen here, and the Jones is kind of running horizontal. We're right there where all the green is. And so I wanted to kind of show you guys that space, and then come back. Here's the house, my house is 626. Here's 628 on the left, on the west side. And then the lot lines, so between our houses, we've got basically a run of trees going down the west side. Here's the east side between me and their office building. And then this is it, looking at it from a different direction, coming back up between the two. You can see it's pretty tight through there. And then across the back, this is along the north boundary with 628 kind of there on your right. This is an easement that accesses the back of my house. This is from Boylan, and then coming back this way, that is looking from the other direction. So kind of gives you just a visual of where everything lays out. I know it's kind of hard to see, especially when you're just looking at the topo maps. So having some pictures on the ground is kind of helpful. So what I wanted to kind of do is look at some different ways that I was envisioning. So I sent some different ideas over to Jess, and we kind of started here. And I said, well, this might be an option of how to integrate some of my desires and some of her desires. And so, this kind of just put some boxes on the ground here. You can see the green is me, the yellow is their current office building. I'm trying to integrate some different heights to step down, but it didn't really, I think what they really want to do is maximize density, which makes great sense, right? So I said, well, let's do something different then. So over a couple of nights ago, I sat down and tried a different round here, and so this is kind of what I ended up with. So it might be kind of a futile exercise to do this because, I'm not a designer or an architect, but my goal was to create something that had a step down from between Glenwood and St. Mary's, integrated some of their desires to get more density with some 7 stories, parking deck, et cetera. And so this is it from the Boylan side, and then this is it from the front. And what this really does for me is it allows me to continue to have an easement across the back. It gives, keeps the historic preservation by retaining my house and 628. It gives more density for both of, for them, might not hit the total mark they're looking for. Keeps the tree canopy, which they fall on my property anyway, and kind of integrating more green space into it. And so, you know, I'm just trying to think of this in a different way. Instead of just everything needs to be as tall and as big and fill up the space as possible, is there a way that we can look at zoning and creating conditions to make something that fits for both of our plans, which is, you know, keeping neighbor identity, having a step down, having access to my house, creating space around it without becoming the middle of this donut. And just backing up here, I mean, Casa's been great. I've really enjoyed meeting all their tenants, their employees. Jess has been great to work with. I've known her for many years. And, you know, I think we're just on 2 different sides of the coin here and trying to figure out the best way to make this work. And there might not be a way to compromise, but at least I just wanted to give it a whirl. So that's why I'm here speaking today. So I think there was someone else that wanted to speak.
Thank you, sir. There's 1 minute remaining on the clock.
Good morning, Chris Crew, 306 Elm Street, Raleigh. I'm here on behalf of the Society for Preservation of Historic Oakwood. We are a now 51-year-old preservation organization here in the city of Raleigh. And while our main goal and our main thrust is the preservation of the historic Oakwood district, we do take interest in development issues and preservation issues in particular around the city. And I'm here today to ask you to consider preservation of the historic fabric of our city as you enter into these zoning requests that you're looking at these days. We're aware of at least 3 historic buildings that have been doomed by some recent actions, and we're working with the city to purchase a property where we might possibly relocate one of these. So we're here as advocates for preservation and to offer our assistance in any way we can in finding some reasonable solutions to preserving the historic fabric of this city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to pull back for questions and comments from commissioners. Personally, I'm ready to support this. I do think that was a pretty large concession with the height change on the corner. And if I heard you correctly, that resulted in a loss of 15% of the affordable units that would be possible there.
Yeah, the analysis, I think, shrunk from 117 units that they would assume if it was residential to 99. So it was a 15% decrease.
Okay, so I'm not interested in whittling away additional affordable units, although I will defer to the rest of the commission to see what your interests are.
I support this case as is.
I have a question for staff. Who owns the easement?
I don't. I can do some research, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
The easement is on Casa's property, but 626 has the right to use the easement. So it's on the deed for 626, which is Mr. Wilkins' property.
And does that stay even with after the rezoning?
Yeah, that would not affect the easement. He would still have access to it.
Okay. Thank you. That's what I was getting at. You just did a better job asking the question.
Any additional questions for either the applicant or for staff? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
Yep. Okay, just making sure right this time. I move to approve case Z6822 and to adopt the approved consistency statement contained in today's agenda materials.
Thank Thank you. We have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. Do we have a second? Second from Commissioner Dautel. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion?
I plan to support, but also just want to acknowledge the complication here and sort of the situation in a growing city. So I want to be, just acknowledge what's happening and know that we're sensitive to that.
Excellent, thank you. Okay. By show of hands, those in support? And any opposed? Okay, okay. That motion passes unanimously. We are going to move on to new business, where there are 3 items on the agenda today. These requests have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda, and we will hear a full staff presentation, applicant presentation, and hear from any members of the public. The first item is Z6422 on Lead Mine Road and Philcrest Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 0.82 acres from residential 4 to office mixed use 4 stories parking limited, and this is a general use case. We'll start with a staff presentation from Donald Belk.
Thank you, Chair Fox. This case is just south of a recent case, Z5320, congregate care facility that was approved last year. Note the predominance of residential 4 zoning that remains in the area across Lead Mine from a large commercial mixed-use area. This aerial shows the proximity of this site to the Crabtree Valley City Growth Center with the mall at its core. And note the commercial uses also near the site, along with some moderate scale residential and apartment complex across the street. Closer in view, this large wooded area north and east of the site is part of a core of unannexed properties, a donut hole, if you will. Some perspectives here, Lead Mine Road views north and south from Philcrest. These are the Overture apartments in the image here. Some additional streetscapes, a couple of views of Philcrest from the west. Note, Philcrest is a NCDOT maintained street. Comparison of existing and proposed zoning. This proposal would entitle up to 17 residential units and 15,440 square feet of office space, 2,800 feet approximately of retail square footage. It does score very well on our transportation and energy analysis with proximity to transit and high walk scores, lower costs of transportation, and better access to jobs. The site is served directly by Route 23, Millbrook. It also scores well in our analysis. It does add to the housing supply, supporting a more affordable housing stock. No subsidized units proposed here. It would permit a variety of housing types, including apartments and townhomes, smaller units and smaller lots, and again, adjacent to transit. Our demographic assessment shows that this area has a lower population of people of color and low-income groups. The age cohorts here, less than age 5, greater than age 64, as well as the linguistically isolated population. These are slightly higher than the city average. And the median gross rents in this area have increased at a slightly lower rate than the city average. The request for office mixed use 4 stories is consistent with the future land use map designation of office and residential mixed use, and the parking limited frontage is consistent with both the urban thoroughfare and the frequent transit area designations for urban form. This proposal is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. Number of consistent policies noted here, particularly capitalizing on transit access, reinforcing the urban pattern and density transitions. Again, the building height transitions, it does represent an infill development, and frontage will be provided. We found no inconsistent policies with this proposal. Again, your deadline for action is January 23rd of next year. 2 meetings between now and then on the 13th of December and again on January 10th. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Next, we will hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Commissioners. Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group. I'm here today with Elias Stackliff, the applicant, as well as Roy Saba, the property owner. Just to give a quick recap of the surrounding area, I wanted to zoom in a little bit on what these surrounding uses are and what they look like. Lead mine in this area no longer has the single-family character of that surrounding area to the east. In particular, what you see here, those parcels that are highlighted in yellow, not the subject site. Those are the Waltonwood lead mine project, and I highlighted those because those are in the development process right now, and so that area will be changing here shortly. So to go from north to south on this slide, I want to start with Crabtree Overlook. We're looking here at a 6-story office building. For the Waltonwood lead mine, all we have here is kind of the site plan and some elevations. And what you see here is, to orient you, Fillcrest is to the right on this slide with lead mine at the bottom of the slide. And then an elevation looking from Fillcrest. Across lead mine, you have the Overture Apartments and then the Candlewood Suites as well. So as you heard, from Mr. Belk. The property is within the frequent transit area. It's on the urban thoroughfare. It's also very close to the transit emphasis corridor. And the future land use map recognizes that this property and those properties having frontage on lead mine are something different from that residential neighborhood to the east. And so here what you see is, a difficult transition, but a transition nonetheless, where we've had perhaps a historical single-family character on this side of lead mine, as you just saw, that is changing quickly, no longer appropriate within this corridor. So a transition of some kind is needed here. With development would come improvements of the street. I'd say the vast majority of comments that we've heard relate to traffic on Fillcrest and the state of Fillcrest overall, and so the development would require pedestrian facilities as well as improving safety in this area. One thing that you would see is, I understand there's an issue turning left onto lead mine here for a few reasons. There's been a recent improvement less than a quarter mile to the north where a new traffic light has been installed, opening a window for those left turns. Also, development of this site would require that site distance triangle, an improved situation over the existing condition today. I do want to note that there are a few reasons that that this proposal would create the transition that's needed between lead mine itself and that residential neighborhood. One reason being that surrounding our district zoning. As you all know, when that is next to the mixed-use district, as is proposed here, you end up with a required neighborhood transition under the UDO. And this is one of the situations that provision was designed to address and that works well here. I'm sure you're all familiar, but that neighborhood transition that would be required pushes the building away from those residential neighborhoods and then follows that with a height control for another 50 feet. So there's 100 feet of protections along the western and southern boundaries of this site. Requires a landscape buffer yard, However, the major factor actually protecting those neighborhoods to the east is that parking limited frontage that's proposed, because any building would be required to have its facade within 100 feet of both streets. And here, just to give you an idea of what that looks like, it really pulls that building over to lead mine and away from that residential neighborhood. Oh, there we go. That's a light control. So I understand that we do have at least one speaker in support today, and I would like to turn it over to him.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Tony Curran. I live at 2008 Fieldcrest Road in Raleigh. Our home is diagonally across Fieldcrest from the subject site that's being rezoned. My wife and I have lived there for 44 years. Put that in some context, Jimmy Carter was the president of the United States at the time, and when Faye and I pulled our pennies together and bought the old rundown farmhouse and owned 3 acres of land. We were married in the woods, raised our sons, and plan to continue living there for the remainder of our life, regardless of the development around us. We support the Sabas family's rezoning effort. The subject property currently is boxed in on all sides if you happen to visit the site. It faces 22,000 cars a day on Lead Mine Road and is unsustainable and to remain unsuitable to remain residential. It is ideally suited to become exactly what the Sabas plan to build. Their site plan is excellent from our standpoint, where they put the parking and the building itself. A big subject of concern is Fieldcrest Road. A large part of the Fieldcrest Road that is of concern fronts our property. I know the nearby neighbors concerned is putting it mildly, but what we witness on a daily basis, we've backed out of our driveway in the crook of the road for 44 plus years and still do. We've never had a bump up, never had a near miss, and seldom is there more than one car waiting to get on the lead mine off of Fieldcrest. The bottom line is traffic impact to Fieldcrest and lead mine by this development is minute. Inman Park is getting their much needed light, which is wonderful for them, which will give that gap in the truck coming down Lead Mine Road to come out. Crabtree Forest Development, which is, if you continue on Fieldcrest towards the east, as well as the Hillock residents and people on North Hills Drive, they will continue to have the much used alternative routes to North Hills Drive and to Lead Mine Road. When we get out of our driveway, we go to North Hills Shopping Center by going up Fieldcrest Road, turning right down Memorial, hitting Hillock, and going one way or the other. So currently, Fieldcrest is not quite as bad as some people. Walking's difficult. If the county came in there and scraped the side of the road to where the pavement was visible, you got a lot more pavement visible for those people coming down Fieldcrest Road. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. If there are no other members who wish to speak in support, I'm going to ask anybody who wishes to speak in opposition to come forward. Those in opposition have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning. I'm Kevin Gard, 1644 Standard Trail. Thank you, Madam Chair and Planning Commission members for hearing our concerns today. So Z6422 is in this area of extraterritorial jurisdiction land where there's about 12 and a half acres of land. And according to the flume, this could be scaled up to residential low scale and add 21 to 62 units of residential development in the future. And then there's the 3 parcel lands, including 6422, that could be mixed use along lead mine. There are about 40 homes on Memorial Drive and Russell Drive that access Fillcrest Road directly. And then there's 100 plus homes off of Hillock that indirectly access Fillcrest Road. Fillcrest, as was mentioned, is a NCDOT maintained road. It is narrow. It doesn't have shoulders. Anybody who would walk down this street as a pedestrian trying to get to Lead Mine Road, if they encountered a vehicle, they would never do it again. It was up, staff report mentioned all the development around the area. We have lots of growth here in the City Growth Center along Lead Mine and the urban thoroughfare. And it's all considered to be a frequent transit area, but there are no sidewalks to connect the residential over to Lead Mine Road or North Hills Drive. Just another picture at the site where there are trucks. You can see with any delivery trucks that come in that will come into Walton Woods Lead Mine or to this site, there's just no room for traffic. They have to yield to each other, not just pedestrians. With this growth, we have a lot of traffic that was mentioned. There's over 30,000 average daily trips on Lead Mine Road right by the site. And then over in the City Growth Center to the left, there's lots of residential development. There's 900 units coming. 275 for Claremont at Crabtree are under development today, and then there's site plan reviews for Crabtree North where they'll add another 330. All that 900 unit traffic will come in on Charles Drive and Marriott Drive, and you can see that Marriott Drive is not aligned with Fillcrest at Lead Mine, so there's a traffic conflict there in accessing Lead Mine Road. And to make matters worse, as Fillcrest Road hits Lead Mine, there's that angle of Lead Mine Road along with some obstructions that block the sight distance. This picture in the middle shows you what you see if you're sitting at Fillcrest looking to make a left-hand turn onto Lead Mine Road South. You see a utility box, a utility pole, and vegetation. And the yellow dash line points to the mailbox on the property, which on the right-hand side, if you just walk over to the mailbox, you can see the angle of the traffic that's approaching Fillcrest from Lead Mine North. So even with clearing this out, it's very difficult to see the oncoming traffic. In the staff plan today represents development that could happen in the picture in the middle, where because of the residential property in the south, there would be a 50-foot transition zone where there's a building setback from the south property line. And this pushes any building mass that would come along up into the upper corner where Fillcrest meets Lead Mine Road. If in the future the 2 parcels to the south are redeveloped according to the flume to mixed use, that would eliminate that 50-foot transition region and open up the area and give a lot more flexibility for a building to go in. The other important point here is that for those other parcels, when they're developed, they will end up having cross-access to Fillcrest Road. Now, we saw a picture just a minute ago from the applicant where it only showed a driveway on Lead Mine Road. We've never seen that picture before, and it didn't imply that there would be access from Fillcrest. So we really like a lot of clarification on where the access would be to this site, and that's brand new information to us. The applicant has counsel now that wasn't present at the first or second neighborhood meetings and hasn't been, to my knowledge, hasn't been involved with our correspondence, so we would like an opportunity to express the concerns from the neighborhood to their council. We want to know if Raleigh will take over Fillcrest Road and upgrade it to city standards, adding sidewalks to give access to the neighborhood and this other growth that's coming along. And then we also want the safety concerns about accessing Lead Mine Road from Fillcrest addressed. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Angie Brandt, 1900 Russell Drive. It's great to be here. Thank you for the time to talk. I have a couple things to say. The first thing is that the unfortunate use of the term objection or opposition in this case because, quite frankly, I represent everybody who lives off of Russell Drive, Philcrest, Hillock, Memorial, and we are pro-growth. We have known for a long time that this is going to be a developed area. As you've heard, Philcrest is just not up to standards, and the reason why we have to keep talking about it is because in the comp plan, there's a question, and it is, will community facilities and streets be available at city standards to serve the proposed use of the property? Yes, of course, in the adjacent portion of Philcrest, it will be brought up to standards, but the remainder won't. And we have been asking for over 2 years, how do we address Philcrest Road? We're looking to you as a planning commission. For 2 years, we've been trying to figure out how do we do this so that this is a safe space for our families to drive. Raleigh is not the same as it was 40 years ago. It's not the same as it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago. I have a recent driver. He's a teenager. He feels unstoppable, and he won't drive down that road. It is not safe. I drive it every single day, multiple times. So, there's two things here. One, how do we, as citizens, address this? You've heard about donut holes over and over today. We are a donut hole. There's going to be more growth coming. We're not opposed to it. But as it pertains to this case, putting the lens back on, we have a small issue here because up until today, we were under the impression this was going to be professional building use and that the only entrance and exit would be on Philcrest. So now we see something new today. I have attended both neighborhood meetings along with everybody else. We signed in, we gave our email addresses. We have not heard from the applicant. We haven't had a chance to talk to them about conditions. So where we're at right now today is we don't oppose development of this site. They are our neighbors. What they have talked to us about previously doesn't seem unreasonable, but there does need to be some conditions, none of which that we've talked about. So I do have conditions here with me today. We have not heard from their attorney. We would be happy to talk with their attorney and go through it in offline condition, but at this point, if you have to vote yes, no, or to defer, we're going to ask you to defer so that we have a chance to actually have meaningful, thoughtful planning conversations with the developer to try to come up with some conditions for this case. And then separately, we just look to you to help us figure out what to do with Philcrest. We talk about walkability. You guys have been talking about watershed. We've been talking about all kinds of things that are complications of a growing city, and yet we have plenty of policies within the comp plan that support bringing Philcrest up to standards. We know annexation typically happens on a voluntary basis, but yet the city can initiate it and can go through the General Assembly and get voted on. Whether it's a small area study, we don't know. I'm an average citizen. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a developer. I'm not a planner. And we just look to you for some support so we can be part of a solution and part of helping our growing, vibrant community thrive and be a good place for all of our citizens. Thanks. I'll yield my time for questions. And would you like the conditions that I printed out? Do you want to see them?
Sure, you can give them to the clerk. Thank you. Sure. There's a remaining minute and 42 seconds. Please feel free.
I've lived on Hillock Drive for 30 years. I'm concerned about through traffic through my neighborhood, people turning right on Philcrest, right on Memorial, right on Hillock, right in front of my house, and right on North Hills to take the left-hand turn onto Leadmine to get on the belt line to go to their jobs in the Triangle. Now, this specific development I don't have a problem with. If it is in fact 8 to 10 office buildings with architects, attorneys, engineers, and accountants, and 20 to 25 parking spaces. But it seems like I heard that it's going to be 17. So I'm just a little bit concerned that this not be some kind of bait and switch. Again, as it stands, the original proposed use was perfect for that area. And that's all I have to say.
Before you walk away, do you want to say your name for the record?
My name is Terry Fairley, and I live at 2201 Hillock Drive. Right there.
Thank you, ma'am. If there are no other members of the public who wish to speak, I'm going to open it up for questions and comments from commissioners. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Commissioner Bennett.
I think there was like a little bit of time left. I don't know. I would just like to hear what the conditions are that the neighbors are proposing. I know they were passed around to us, but it would be nice to get them on the record so the applicant could respond, if we have time for that.
Can I,
Oh, is it 4 pages? Okay.
can I,
Never mind.
well, can I ask a question? I mean, apparently there was no conversations between the neighbors and the applicant, so I'd like to hear from the applicant about that, please.
Yes, thank you. We did hear that concern today. There were neighborhood meetings held. It is true that I have recently become involved, so after that time, so I understand that there is specifically interest in speaking with me, but I can tell you that the applicant has been participating in those conversations prior to my involvement.
As we quickly glance through the proposed conditions, many of them look as if they're calling out code requirements.
Could I just say that these are pretty much in line with, or very similar to what we requested from the Z5320 case, which is, going to be the Walton Wood. So there's that, because there's the transition between the City Growth Center across the street and the R4 directly adjacent on the east and the south sides. We're just trying to give similar conditions to what was agreed upon with the Z5320 case.
Excellent.
So parking and lighting and setbacks and areas for for trash and things of that nature.
Okay. Would the applicant like to have some time to be able to review these proposals?
I still don't have a copy.
One can be made available to you post haste.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I can go ahead and move to some questions. Along Lead Mine Road, one of the concerns, and I think it's addressed in the condition, is about the site triangle looking down Lead Mine Road. Would that site triangle be required as part of site plan?
That is my understanding. I would defer to transportation staff on that.
This is Jason Myerson, Transportation. Don just pulled up a, let me try that again. The quick answer to the question is yes, that is something that's evaluated during site plan. I'm going to attempt to zoom into this.
Can you talk into the microphone just a little bit more?
I'm sorry, I thought I was. Jason Myerson, Transportation. The quick answer is yes, that's something that's evaluated during site plan. And as a for instance, if you look at this site plan, which is not yet approved, but it's been submitted and it's in its second round of comments for the Walton development, you can see these little lines here, basically at every driveway and at the intersection itself. They're evaluating site distance and making sure there isn't anything in that space. And that same sort of thing would happen if a site plan were submitted for this case on that piece of property.
Thank you. And while you're up there, looking at Philcrest Drive, one of the concerns that the neighbors are talking about are the street improvements there. It's my understanding that since this is not designated in the street plan, that it's considered a local street. And I know that all new Raleigh streets are built with curb and gutter. And is a local street, if something is designated a local street, would it get a sidewalk as well under the
Yes,
current
ma'am.
street plan?
All new streets and all frontage improvements in the city have sidewalks. And what this shows is what the half of the street on the north is proposing to meet those code requirements. It's maybe a little bit hard to make out, but there is a sidewalk, there's a 6-foot buffer behind the back of curb. Right now, Philcrest is not within the right-of-way fully. It tends to straighten the curves where the right-of-way itself curves more. That impacts the site to the north. They're dedicating that right-of-way excuse me,
and bringing this curve here to meet the standards for a neighborhood yield street, 150-foot radius, which I think it's a little, they're basically relaxing that curve a little bit into their site. And the similar improvements of curb and gutter and sidewalk for a Tier 3 site plan of this site would be required, and potentially some right-of-way dedication based on that exact center line. I will add two things. One is to correct the staff report. I wrote something in there that was probably not technically correct, in that upon completion of these improvements, it will not automatically be taken over for city maintenance. The city will maintain the sidewalks behind the curb because NCDOT does not do that. NCDOT will continue to maintain the road and the curb and gutter and all those improvements that are built. It would be eligible to be swapped into the city system from NCDOT. And one of the requirements and prerequisites for that is that the area and the right-of-way has to be within the city limits. There's about 4 or 5 properties east of here that are outside of the city limits, and we can't have a discussion with NCDOT about taking over maintenance of something that's outside of the city. So that really gets into questions of annexation and the state laws surrounding that. The other thing is that while it is a neighborhood yield, it was determined that that's the appropriate street type given the context and and I would note that on this site plan, the main parking for the development and the residences is not off of Hillcrest. This is kind of a service and staff entrance, I understand, with a limited number of spaces. While it is a neighborhood yield, that was determined because there is an expectation of on-street parking in this area. Neighborhood local and neighborhood streets are wider to accommodate active curb uses while still maintaining two-way traffic. We wouldn't expect or really want that here. If we widen it more, it would just become faster into a narrow space where it can't really safely accommodate that. But you also notice that a 27-foot wide neighborhood neighborhood yield is a 2-lane street, and they are widening it into their site to have 2 lanes outbound, so a left turn lane and a right turn lane. So it'll be wider than that at the intersection with Leadmine Road. Is there any other questions about these issues that I can
Thank you. So
answer?
to clarify, the street directly adjacent to the property would have to be improved and brought up to city standards in connection with this Tier 3 site plan.
Tier 3.
But the remaining pieces of Hillcrest Road would not in this case. What I think the neighbors want to know, what would be the process to bring the rest of the street up to code?
One way to approach that is to ask the question of when would those properties be subdivided or developed as a Tier 3 site plan and annexed. And I think that maybe other than that, the questions about if and when it could be annexed is really a question that I'm not a good person to answer. Maybe Mr. Crane can answer that, or once it's within the city limits, then the city could do a public project to do something. But until that's the case, we're not really allowed to do so.
Thank you.
I think I saw in the staff report, Mr. Myers, if you hold a second, that there was a mention of one of the adjacent property owners being in talks to extend the sidewalk the length of Hillcrest on that side of the road. Are you familiar with those talks? Am I misremembering? Anybody else see that in the staff report? Maybe I dreamed it.
I am not familiar with that, and I don't remember that being in my portion of the staff report.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Be a wishful.
I'm going to go read mine and make sure. Maybe it'll refresh my memory, but maybe Don can say something about that.
Thank you.
Additional questions for staff or the applicant? Commissioner Bennett?
During the Z5320 case, there were a number of discussions between that applicant and the neighbors, and I think there was some discussion of the applicant reaching out to other property owners, but I don't really know the status of where those conversations were. But we have not initiated those discussions.
Thank you.
My question's for the applicant. There was a question about whether access was going to be from Leadmine or Hillcrest. Can you answer that?
My apologies. We needed to confer. Could you repeat the question?
Will access be on Hillcrest or Leadmine?
So we don't know the answer to that. The picture that you did see today, that was absolutely conceptual. We do not have that information. That was really more about kind of where the buildings need to be. However, my understanding generally from transportation staff is that they prefer to have that flexibility going into site plan to determine the best location for it. Today there is access on Fillcrest. We don't know that that would remain.
So if I could follow up, I'm sorry. I found the text I was talking about is not in the staff report. It's in the summary of issues from one of the meetings, and it mentioned that the applicant had reached out to a property owner, and I believe, is that Mr. Curran? Is that the property owner in question? Have they been talking to you about this? So I would suggest to the community that you continue pushing on all cylinders, like work with your neighbors, work with the city to try to bring this into code and see what you can do. I don't think that this project can bring the whole street up to the code that you're looking for.
But if I understood Mr. Myers correctly, the city can't do anything for the portion that's outside of its jurisdiction, correct? So
Correct.
even if they work with the neighbors, there's nothing the city can do unless those properties are
They would
annexed.
work with the neighbors to annex.
To annex the properties
Yeah.
into the city, okay. Just want to make sure we're being clear.
Make one point of clarification here. If somebody petitioned to voluntarily improve public right-of-way that was not in the city limit, was in the city EZTJ, we would review that. And there are pieces of sidewalk that we probably maintain, partly because they don't require very much maintenance, that are not strictly within the city limits. But the official swapping of maintenance between NCDOT and the city of Raleigh cannot happen, I think, by law. But if somebody were to come to the city and say, we would like to build a sidewalk with an existing right-of-way, I think we would be able to find a way to allow that to happen if it was physically possible.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Any additional questions or comments from commissioners? I think we have a lot to think about with the list of proposed 10 conditions that we're seeing at the table, so we might need to defer this item.
Yes, and I would also recommend some sort of conversation with the neighbors, since that maybe hasn't happened, or maybe Ms. Stewart is new to the process. I think you said you recently got involved. So maybe there could be an opportunity if we defer this to speak with the neighbors about their concerns and proposed conditions.
I'd be happy to have those conversations, and this, certainly we will have a lot of responses on this. If you'd like to hear them today, that's fine. Otherwise, we're happy to continue that conversation.
I think we can defer this item to our December 13th meeting. That allows you enough time to further discuss with the neighbors and to review these in a little bit more detail.
I would just like to make a comment. I think it's consistent with the FLUM and the future land use, the comp plan. I think it's an appropriate use. I'm generally in favor of this. I just feel like, again, to be consistent, we talk a lot about the applicants and the neighbors having some type of conversation. So I'm not trying to weigh this thing down or mire it down. I just think that for consistency's sake, I would like there to be some conversation. I just want to let my stance be known before we defer the case.
Agreed. Excellent. Okay. If there's no additional comment, without objection, this case is deferred to our December 13th meeting. And we are going to move on to item F.2, which is case Z6522 on Willard Place. This is a request to rezone approximately 2.04 acres from neighborhood mixed use 7 stories urban limited and office mixed use 3 stories detached with the North Boylan Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District to downtown mixed use 20 stories shopfront conditional use. We will start with a staff presentation from Ira Mabel.
Yep, good morning, thank you. So your deadline for this case is in January, the 21st. Our HDC did review this request a couple of times. There is a memo in your packet. They do recommend approval. So this zoning is on Hillsborough Street, Boylan Avenue, Willard Place, partially in the Cameron Park NCOD. So the request would remove the NCOD on those sites that currently have it. Directly across the street from Z2620, which is this case here, approved in October, if that rings a bell. So a bit of a location map on Hillsborough Street. I have more of a zoom in. So this is the entire western half of the block. And for further reference, the conditions especially reference different properties. So just to help you all, the Elmwood Historic House is the upper left, so the northwest corner there. And the Char Grill is the opposite end, so the southeast corner. I think I got that right. And then there's one condition referencing the other 3 houses, which are those 3 lots that share this internal parking. And then there's a disused fuel sales on the corner there. There's no conditions to reference that. So, and I can go back here if we need to. So some photos of the site. The Elmwood is a little bit hidden with trees, and it also faces Hillsborough Street. I think historically the property was actually the whole way down Hillsborough Street was their front yard. And a couple other shots of the other existing uses. So the first condition prohibits some uses, and then the rest, I believe, all came out of the RHGC discussion, all have to do with various levels of effort for preservation. So the first is requiring a COA be filed to move the Elmwood House before anything else happen. Condition number 3 is about if that doesn't happen, notice of relocation or salvage. 4 and 5 are both documentation related. And then 6 again is about the other three residential houses and structures, and notice to move or salvage those. So quite a bit increase in entitlement, again going from a mix of 3 and 7 stories to 20. Pretty high scores being the proximity to downtown. Hillsborough Street is also a frequent transit corridor, so quite a lot of bus service on combination of Hillsborough Street and St. Mary Street. Proximate to the request, so the site is again there. Would add quite a bit to the housing supply and would allow all units but detached. And pretty typical scores on the land use and EJ screen for downtown. So other cases you've seen in this part of the city. The request is inconsistent overall with the future land use map. So the Flume does support these two lots on Hillsborough are already central business district, but the remainder are not. So there is not a slide here, but staff is recommending that approval of this request basically change the rest of these lots to also be central business district. The frontage included is consistent with the urban form, which is downtown here. So again, consistent with the plan overall, and consistent with the map for the office and residential mixed use designated lots. And inconsistent, so again with the future land use map, and then those ORMU lots are in the edge map, the downtown edge map. So inconsistent with that policy, which recommends tapering and a reduction in height. But otherwise supported by uses about, policies about uses near transit, urban pattern frontage, density downtown, et cetera. And that's it from me. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mabel. Next, we'll hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of the commission. I'm Jamie Schwadler with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street here on behalf of the applicant this morning. I also have with us our entire development team, and I'll reserve some time for both Michael Blunt from Wilson Blunt and Mr. Little, the owner of the Elmwood House, to speak with you today. I'd like to just note at the outset of this case that this case is very different from the other two 20-story zonings that you approved in the last several months in this area, and that's because it's closer to downtown. The height here is more justified, and we've committed at the outset for his significant historic preservation commitments to relocate Elmwood Home to a more appropriate location within the city. That was done intentionally early in the case. We started off with our first neighborhood meeting with 52 participants, worked through 2 meetings with RHDC, and had a second meeting with only 4 participants, most in favor of what we had done with the case. And that is to take what has been seen in this area from a 7- and 3-story designation with an NCOD to a DX20 shopfront conditional use to provide additional housing and office along a key corridor in downtown adjacent to other DX districts. So the difference in some of the previous cases you had is they were kind of in the middle of the NCOD area. They weren't adjacent to DX. This is directly across the street from Hillsborough and the Block 83 development, closer in proximity to Glenwood Avenue and the rest of the downtown area. The downtown policies support heights of up to 40 stories with transitions down. This is a 20-story request, and we believe that due to the significant investment in relocating Elmwood Home, that height is justified here. It's also justified because of the significant consistencies with the policies in your packet, including the frequent transit area, the urban form map, and the downtown designation, all which call for heights in this area and adjacent to other 16 and 20-story developments to be this significant. At the same time, we're balancing that with the historic preservation conditions for the Char Grill site, Elmwood, and the TR Ash homes. And I'd like Mr. Little and Michael to really address those. But I think the context of this really calls out why this is an appropriate designation and the height is justified here. These are rezoning requests in the last 2 years in this area within a quarter mile of the site. There's been 11 rezoning requests. What you see on the screen is those are only within a tenth of the mile of the site. As you can see, most of those went from some sort of combination of 3- and 7-story designation with the NCOD to a much higher designation, the most recent cases being Z1821 and Z1622, going to that 20-story designation, Z14 and Z16, both going to the 20-story designation, both arguably further from the downtown area, and both kind of a piecemeal fashion of what they were suggesting at the time. Since that time, those designations have been updated for Z16 to be the DX designation in the CBD urban, or the CBD comprehensive plan. And so what we have is kind of a filling in of a donut hole for that DX designation. And that overall brings it consistent with both the flume and the comprehensive plan overall, as you've seen in your staff report. Ira did a great job in summarizing the uses and the conditions. I'll just note that all of these were added after that significant work that we did with the RHDC. We came back to a second meeting and included not only the commitment to relocate Elmwood Home, which will require a COA as part of a separate process, but also included commitments to either allow others to relocate or salvage the TR Ash homes on the property in direct response to the RHDC, as well as archaeological assessments and documentation of the Char Grill building. All of these were suggestions by the RHDC, and as a result, we received unanimous recommendation for approval from the RHDC. That's after working with the owners and Preservation NC to make sure these commitments were strong before they came to you, and allows for significant relocation and preservation. With that, I will turn it over to Michael Blunt, who can address the goals of this mixed-use site.
Thank you, Jamie, and good morning, commissioners. I'm Michael Blunt with Wilson Blunt Development. We're a local development firm with significant experience completing projects of all property types. We're structured to complete projects from start to finish, and that includes several in the city of Raleigh, most of which are multi-story buildings in urban settings. This project is very important to us, and we understand the great responsibility of redeveloping a project in a very high-profile location for our city. Our company's principals all have growing families, and we have no intentions to leave. So we're very focused on creating a project we can be proud of while preserving the history that runs with this land. We're still in the process of determining the exact mix of uses for the project, and current market and economic conditions haven't helped us in solidifying that design, but we do expect a high-rise development, likely with a mix of retail, office, multifamily residential, and structured parking. And I'll quickly review our plans for the preservation aspect of this project. The first and most notable is the original Char Grill location on Hillsborough Street. Its owners, Ryan Wilder and Malin Aycock, have been very involved throughout our rezoning process, and they regretted not being here today. They spoke at both of our neighborhood meetings and have tried on their own accord to let the public know that they're very excited for the opportunity to be a tenant in the new building, which is a great desire of ours. We've committed to honoring the nostalgia of the current restaurant in the new facility and are especially excited about helping Char Grill continue operating downtown for another generation. 3 of the parcels in the assemblage are owned by the T.R. Ash Development Company. 2 of those face Willard, the other facing Boylan. They sort of encircle the Elmwood House. They currently are occupied by the Smith Gardner engineering firm. They were all built around 1910, but do not have any historical designation or specific historical significance. We're offering the public the opportunity to salvage all or parts of these houses in our conditions. Most important, let's see here. Well, I'll get to it. Most important from a historical perspective is the Elmwood House at the corner of Boylan and Willard, which is owned by Mr. William Little and his wife, Catherine. We've committed to preserving Elmwood by relocating it to another location in Raleigh. We've been communicating regularly with the owners of several viable relocation sites in the downtown area and are still assessing the most appropriate location. But all great prospects. We've explored routes to move the house to some of these potential sites. We've discussed the logistical steps of moving the house with city development services and transportation, as well as public utility companies. And we're working with a couple of reputable house relocation companies that have successfully relocated some of the most notable historic homes in Raleigh. And with that, I'd like to pass things along to Mr. William Little to tell more about the Elmwood House.
Thank you very much. My name is William Little. My wife and I, Catherine Little, have owned Elmwood since about 1998. We've practiced law there for about 24 years, retired last year. Elmwood has been in my extended family since the 1870s. It was built between 1810 and 1813. Elmwood is the 4th oldest structure in Raleigh, residential structure, first being Joel Lane House. You also have the Haywood Hall and Crabtree Jones, and then Elmwood. Between 1810 and 1813, it was built by Chief Justice John Lewis Taylor of the North Carolina Supreme Court. Followed by him, the owner was Justice William Gaston of the North Carolina Supreme Court. Gaston was the first student enrolled at Georgetown. He was also a major supporter of religious freedoms in North Carolina. After Justice Gaston, it was owned by Ambassador William Saunders, who was ambassador to Spain. After him, it was William Willard, an industrialist whose family gave the property for Harvard University. After that, it was Samuel Ash, a major historian for North Carolina. He also founded the Raleigh News Observer by buying the News and the Raleigh Observer and combined the two. The last judge, this is known as the House of Judges. The last judge was Judge George Basin, who was the Chief District Court judge here in Raleigh. He died a few years ago. He was a cousin of mine. He was also a major proponent for the advanced causes of developmentally children who were emotionally impaired and led the federal lawsuit to get state funding for that for the very first time. My grandparents had their wedding reception at Elmwood 100 years ago. My parents had their engagement party at Elmwood 50 years ago. It means a great deal to me, and hopefully you all will approve this rezoning. I have full faith and credit in Wilson Blount to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Okay, please come forward. Those in opposition have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Again, Chris Crew, 306 Elm Street, here for the Society for Preservation of Historic Oakwood. I'm not actually standing in opposition to this, but again, to encourage the implementation of preservation conditions on all of these properties. We are willing and able to work with any and all comers to try and find a viable solution for any of these three structures. And rather than, my only suggestion would be, instead of giving 180 days to try to do something, put some final conditions on actually preserving these structures. It's not enough just to try, in our opinion. These are important to the history of Raleigh and to the historic fabric of the city. So again, we're offering our assistance in any way we can to try to make these lovely homes end up somewhere else so we can enjoy them for another 200 years. Thanks very much.
Good morning, Chad Wilkins again, 919 West South Street. Just wanted to kind of once again reiterate, thank you so much again about the historic preservation. And I think the slide that was put up earlier about the recent rezoning request slide that showed basically everything that's happening in Glenwood South, or North Boylan Overlay District, just continues to roll right down the hill. And I guess the question I have is 20 stories appropriate for that humongous space? Right across the street, we've got the Hillsborough and Block 83, which is much lower in height. Now, granted, you guys have been approving 20 stories next door, 20 stories around the corner. I guess I'm just saying, is 20 stories appropriate? Is there an ability to step down into the neighborhood, or is the idea just to develop the whole big block 20 stories? It seems extreme, but in talking to council, obviously it's a financial decision also to do that, so I get that. The project has to make sense, but I guess I'm just saying, as each one of these projects continues to eat away at the overlay district, it's almost like we should just rezone the whole district or get away with the whole overlay district, because we're just chipping away at it, and I'll just keep coming back each time there's one and saying the same thing, but eventually I guess there'll be no overlay district left, and we'll have a lot of 20-story buildings, and that'll be density, and if that's where Raleigh's going, then you won't have to hear from me anymore. So that's all I've got. Thanks a lot.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to open for questions and comments from commissioners.
Thanks. I'll respond to that last comment. I know that we've addressed this several times in this Boylan Overlay District. I think this neighborhood conservation overlay district in particular is a great representation of when one has perhaps outlived its original purpose, and creating a ton of problems and expense for the people that live there in terms of like having some kind of certainty in terms of what's going to happen in the area and land development use patterns. Unfortunately, there's nothing like a sunset clause in an NCOD, so there are no other sort of real options in this case other than a city-initiated rezoning to that area. But I just sort of sympathize with those same comments. We're continually going to, I think, see that at this NCOD.
Commissioner Raines?
Yes, thanks. Comment and then a question for the applicant. Following up with Commissioner Miller's comments, this applying the expansion of the CBD to surrounding areas helps with density, and growth, but it forces the transition to occur in the other surrounding districts. 20 stories to 3 stories is kind of a challenge for city growth. That's the comment. The question I'd like to pose to the applicant is to have a condition that limits material use for the building facade, simply just no EIFS or vinyl clad products, including window frames.
Just to clarify, the request is to limit the materials on new construction to eliminate EIFS and vinyl clad.
Correct, to prohibit EIFS and vinyl clad products.
To prohibit, sorry. I just make sure I was hearing you. We hadn't entertained any questions on that yet. We hadn't heard that request from the RHDC, so it's not something, or the community, so it's not something we had included. We can talk about that. The property owners for this particular assemblage are very numerous, so we wouldn't be able to make those any changes to the case without coming back before January 10th, I believe. But we can confer on that. And I can get back to you.
Additional questions or comments? Commissioner Haber?
I would just like to commend the applicant again for the efforts that they're proposing for the preservation. We've heard some recent cases that I think we were pushing for that as a commission, and I think there was some pushback from the applicant. So I want to thank the applicant, the property owner, as well as the Society for Preservation of Oakwood for offering to support. So I think we're heading in the right direction with that, and I want to say thank you for that.
Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. One question. The 3 other properties are not protected. Is that correct? They have no type of local or state or national, no type of designation at all?
I can respond to that. They do not. They are not on the National Register in the same way that Elmwood is. In addition, the Char Grill property is also not designated. It was on a kind of a state list to watch. And as a part of our discussion at the RHDC initial meeting, they asked us to entertain those 2 conditions I mentioned: the commitment to document the Char Grill site and a commitment to either have a provision of what would happen with the TR Ash houses. When we brought the case forward, there wasn't a plan to do anything really with those homes. That was really our focus was on Elmwood and a Char Grill. But as a result of those RHDC conditions, we did add the protection of notifying the public and providing for salvage or relocation within 180 days of notice. So we appreciate the Oakwood Society showing interest. Their interest would be accommodated in the way the conditions are drafted today.
Okay, thank you. And also, I would just, I share the frustration about, and we've talked about this, as Commissioner Miller said, about chipping away at the NCOD. We voiced that, I think, in several motions to council. I would encourage us to continue to just put it there because it's a larger policy issue, and I don't think the Planning Commission is in a position to change it. I mean, we just have to look at consistency. And so I would just encourage us to continue to voice our concern with how we're chipping away at the overlay districts.
Agreed. Additional comment?
I know in past rezoning cases, we've included in the motion a recommendation for council to review the potential sunset or other amendment to the NCOD process when we have cases that highlight the need for those. So I might encourage us to consider including a recommendation on this case as well.
If I may, if that's the direction of the Planning Commission, we're happy to have the recommendation and consider the EIFS change as we go forward. It's not something we're opposed to. I'd hate to lose 2 months with all of the property signatures and things. It's something that we could add before we schedule the public hearing at council, if that's the preference of the commission.
You comfortable with that?
I would,
We can add into the recommendation that council consider a restriction on materials choice.
I would support that, yeah.
Okay.
Chair, I have one final lighthearted comment. I would like to have a fake condition to maintain Char Grill slide, fill out the card and slide it in, sort of thing.
Excellent.
I apologize.
Duly noted. Okay. Commissioner O'Haver, did you have a comment?
I think if it's okay, just since the applicant was responding to Ms. Bennett's question, I think Chris wanted to make a comment if my fellow commissioners are okay with that.
Yes.
To
By
respond to Ms.
virtue
Bennett's
of
question.
age, all four of those structures are eligible for nomination to the National Register of Historic Places. So while there is no existing, historic break on doing this, it is a possibility.
Excellent. Okay. There's no additional question or comment. It sounded like we were comfortable with entertaining a motion with the additional recommendation to council. If someone would like to go ahead and do that.
Sure. I'll make a motion to approve rezoning case Z6522 and to adopt the proposed consistency statement included in today's agenda materials with 2 amendments. I'd also like to include a recommendation that the city, that the city council ask the applicant to prohibit building materials including EIFS and vinyl clad. And a second recommendation that the city council consider reviewing the current city policy around NCODs and amending or potentially putting in a sunset clause for NCODs as appropriate.
Thank you. Vice Chair Miller's made a recommendation for approval of Z6522. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Rains. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in support and any opposed, that motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the next item, F.3, case Z7522 on Edwards Mill Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 2.39 acres from residential 4 to residential 6. This is a general use case. We will start with a staff presentation from J.P. Mansoff because he has all the cases today. Thank you, Mr. Mansoff.
Thank you. So this is a request to rezone just over 2 acres from R4 to R6 at 3717 Edwards Mill Road, and your deadline for action is January 21st of 2023. Small typo there, 2023. Zoning in this area is predominantly residential. As you can see, a large area of R4 zoning. There is some R10 to the north of the site, but generally residential in the nearby area. Looking at an aerial of the site, again, seeing that large area of low-scale residential surrounding the site. Laurel Hills Park, which is a city park, is across Edwards Mill Road to the east, and there is some commercial uses at the corner of Raleigh Road and Edwards Mill Road, kind of at the bottom of the map. That's the Raleigh Village Shopping Center. So that's sort of the nearby nearest commercial use to the site. A couple of views of the site. There's currently a large single-family home on the site. This is looking south along Edwards Mill Road, and then looking north along Carriage Drive. So lots of trees and an existing single-family home on the site currently. This is a general use case, so no conditions are included in the request. The request would increase the maximum number of residential units on the site from 16 to 27, and the request would also increase the potential building types by allowing townhomes, which are not allowed in R4. The site has a higher walk and bike score than the city average, a similar transit score to the city average, and similar transportation costs to the city average. There is a higher job proximity in this area than the city average. There is bus service along Edwards Mill Road. Route 26 provides 30-minute peak service. The request would add to the housing supply, but does not include subsidized units. It would permit a variety of housing types, smaller units and lots than the citywide average, and it is within walking distance of transit. The area around the site is generally less diverse and wealthier than the city average, with a slightly higher population over age 64. The requested R6 district is consistent with the low-scale residential future land use map designation. There's no urban form here, and it is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. Consistent policies speak to consistency with the future land use map, allowing for more compact development, and generally allowing increased housing in a manner and scale that is consistent with the surrounding development. No inconsistent policies were identified, and no outstanding issues. Again, your deadline for action is January 21st, so there's a couple meetings before that deadline.
Thank you, Mr. Mansoff. Next, we'll hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair, members of the Commission. Worth Mills with Longleaf Law Partners on behalf of Matt Kirkpatrick, the property owner. This is a general use rezoning from R4 to R6 to facilitate a townhouse development. As JP mentioned, this property is approximately 2.4 acres and it is located across Edwards Mill Road from the Laurel Hills Community Center. The Carriage Hills subdivision surrounds the property, but does not include the property. As JP also mentioned, there is an existing single-family home on the property. There are a number of undeveloped sites adjacent to us. There are 2 single-family homes, one to the south and one to the north. The reason that 2 of those lots are currently undeveloped and remain undeveloped is because of the topography and the non-blue line stream that run through those lots. As it relates to this property, there is significant grade change from the middle of the property to the shared boundary line with those 2 undeveloped lots. The rear of this property is likely to be used in a combination of tree conservation area and stormwater control facilities. I think based on that analysis and based on that topography, do not expect a 27-unit yield out of this site. R4 is the predominant zoning district in this immediate area, although there are R6 and R10 zoning to the southwest and northeast, respectively. Future land use map designates this property for low-scale residential. Low-scale residential encourages a range of housing types, which include townhouses, but at a scale that generally follows the precedent set by the existing housing in this area. The low-scale residential designation also includes the R6 zoning district. On the right-hand side of the screen is the nearest townhouse development. The closest townhouse is approximately 500 feet from the lot line here. This property, along with that commercial parcel at the corner of Glen Eden and Edwards Mill, those were rezoned back in 2000. That was rezoning case C-15-2000. That includes 26 townhomes. Conditions limit density on that site to 10 units per acre. There are other townhomes on the screen, the Laurel Woods townhomes. Those have been there for 20 years. So the lengthy precedent of townhomes in this area and the proposed rezoning is consistent with the housing type and at the scale that has been established by both of these townhouse developments. There is no urban form map designation, but I did think it was important to see where this property is in relation to other growth centers nearby. So to the north is the Crabtree Mall City Growth Center. To the south is the UNC Rex Hospital and associated medical use growth center. And so again, this would be locating townhouses, a variety of housing types, kind of directly between both a retail city growth center and a medical city growth center. So there are opportunities both for people to live close to employment as well as to live closer to retail opportunities. So the rezoning Z7522 is consistent with the future land use map, the 2030 comprehensive plan. It's consistent with every policy identified by the planning department. It's compatible with the surrounding area, and this would bring gentle density increase along a major street in between two city growth centers, and therefore it is reasonable and in the public interest. Happy to take any questions and appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Please come forward. Those in opposition have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
How do you reset this? Just hit.
We reset it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. My name is George Lee, and I reside at 3505 Carriage Drive, and we share a boundary with the property that is being discussed. We are Lot 6 in the Carriage Hill subdivision. We still refer to the other property as Lot 5 because we believe that it still is subject to the covenant. But I know there's a disagreement about that, and we have not secured legal representation at this time, but it may be necessary for us to move ahead and do that. We have several people from our neighborhood here today. We feel that the current zoning, R4, it says maximum number of residential units is 16. On a site that small, I don't know how you could build any more than 16. We don't want you to build any. We'd rather see a couple of houses there. But if it ends up being townhomes, and the gentleman who spoke previously said, I don't think there's any way we could put 27, which is what R6 says maximum number 27. We're concerned about a number of things. One is stormwater runoff. Our property is located not to the back side, but to a side close to the back of the property, and it's sloping. We have had situations before where we've had water run down the hill towards our foundation. And I will say that our property, our house itself, is probably not more than about 10 yards from the other property line. So you can imagine if you have a lot of blacktop surface or surfaces that won't absorb the water, it's going to come right down the hill toward it's either going to go down into the ravine behind the property, or it's going to come down on my property. So up until today, we had not really heard much about what the plans were. We had one neighborhood meeting and learned very little other than the fact that they didn't think they were subject to the covenant. We still have not seen a residential site plan. We've seen nothing that would show us where buildings are going to be, how many they're going to be, how tall they're going to be. Parking is a huge concern. Carriage Drive goes directly across the street into Laurel Hills Park. Laurel Hills Park only has one entrance and one exit, and it's directly across the road from Carriage Drive. The entrance into the property being discussed is probably about 10 yards up from Carriage Drive. We do not want any entrance from Carriage Drive into the property. We think that would just create more problems. Also, I don't know where, if you put that many units on a little over 3-acre property, where are people going to park? I just don't see how that's going to happen. But also, we've had a lot of building going on around us. We've had a beautiful new home built across the street that is going to sell for over $1 million. And they've been working on it for months, and there have been trucks parked all up and down Carriage Drive for months. There are times when you can't even back out of your driveway. I can only imagine what it would be like to have bulldozers and dump trucks and whatever in my backyard. And we certainly don't want, I don't think anybody in our neighborhood wants this. Again, we feel the current zoning is adequate. We wonder if there will be a buffer required between properties if a zoning change is allowed. Will upgrades be required along Carriage Drive to handle stormwater runoff? Those are just some of the high points. How tall will the new structures be? Will they have garages? What is the potential price point? Who is the design firm? I've still got about 4 minutes. Would Linda or Harry like to add anything? Linda? Turn it over to Linda Bilderback.
Hello, I'm Linda Bilderback, 3518 Carriage Drive. Now, I don't understand why we aren't allowed to have any conditions on this type of rezoning. At the meeting where we were, we had a city representative there with us. He said that the developer was not obligated in any way to give us conditions. And he also said that the maximum would be 23 townhomes, and the developer would not commit to any kind of land use. We said, what are you going to be doing? What are you not? He would not say anything. I don't know what I'm going to be doing. I don't, the law firm at the beginning said, well, this is a townhouse project, but the developer never confirmed that. He never said what he was actually going to do. That's why when Mr. Lee said that we have not seen any kind of site plan, maybe we're not allowed as a general use. I don't know, but we were told no conditions. We saw no site plan, and we had 27 people at that meeting. So there is a lot of concern about this, not only on the Carriage Drive side, but also Marietta Court, which is across the street. We had many people there concerned about what was going to be doing. There's 2 curb cuts on that property right now. One of the curb cuts is quite close to Carriage Drive, and we already do have some problems getting out of Carriage Drive since we line up with Laurel Hills Park. If that first curb cut is allowed to stay there, that's going to cause a lot more problems because it's not very far from the Carriage Drive lineup with Laurel Hills. So we also saw on the staff rezoning report that they said there was a major stormwater erosion problem with 3612 Carriage Drive, and I have looked, and that belongs to Chris Diamond. And what it is it goes off the back of that property, goes along the ravine and across Carriage Hill into 3612. So it's not only right next door, which Mr. Lee is, but it's also across the ravine and Carriage Hill Drive on the backside to 3612 Diamond property. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. If there are no other members of the public here to speak, we're going to move on to questions and comments from commissioners. I'll start off. I have a question regarding the stormwater piece. Actually, if you could just clarify what would be required at the time of site plan for a project such as this. What are code requirements?
Sally Hoyt, City Stormwater Division. And for a site plan of any type at this site, they would be required to meet UDO 9.2.2, which would require them to look at water quality and runoff rates. And so for water quality, that would be the amount of nitrogen coming off the site. And for runoff rates, they would have to evaluate the 2-year and 10-year design storms and not increase the rate of runoff for those storms.
Excellent, thank you. Do you have any questions or comments from other commissioners?
Thanks. Chair Fox, a question about the community comment about covenants. It seems like there's some unclear documentation that I'd like the applicant or city staff to weigh in on.
Yep. This property was included on a plat for the Carriage Hills subdivision, but it was not owned by the man who recorded the plat. It was owned by Mr. Hionis, who never signed the covenants and he never signed the plat. So his property was not subject to the covenants of the Carriage Hills subdivision. We had a title insurance company review this and insure against that question. So we feel extremely confident that there are no covenants on this property that would otherwise apply to the Carriage Hills subdivision.
Thank you.
Additional questions or comments for both the applicant or staff? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. I was trying to jot down questions as the gentleman was speaking. Will there be any type of buffer required between this property and adjacent properties? And how tall will the new structures be?
So there's no required buffer between residential properties. If there's some stream or TCA that would be dedicated at the site plan stage, that may act as a buffer, but there's no requirement for that. And the maximum height in a residential district is 3 stories and 40 feet.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Commissioner O'Haver?
I tend to agree with Ms. Bennett. I think the proximity of some of those existing residential units, I'd like the applicant just to consider some type of buffering along there. Very well could be TCA along that area. I'm looking at the topo. But I'd like the applicant to respond to see if they'd consider some additional buffering requirements.
I think we can look at buffering. I would also, if it's the Planning Commission's wish to convert this to a conditional use case, then I don't think that we would be looking at a buffer. It may be an increased setback. The side lot line setback in the existing zoning is 10 feet. So under existing zoning per the planning department, we could build 16 homes and those setbacks could be no further than 10 feet from the adjacent property to our south or to our north. I think it's important to, just reiterate that this is a rezoning from R4 to R6. We're not changing the height of any of the proposed structures. It's a extremely modest increase in allowed density. And I think it's a request that is consistent with a lot of the policies that have been put forward by the city over the last 4 to 5 years.
I would agree. I think it's a pretty modest increase. I'm personally not interested in converting it to a conditional use case. I believe the code would cover any of the concerns during development.
So can I clarify then, because I just heard from Mr. Mills that the existing zoning has a side yard of 10 feet, and that's not what I'm looking at on staff's presentation. So can we confirm what the existing zoning requires and what the proposed zoning allows?
So it would likely vary based on the building type. So if we're talking about townhomes, under R4, the only way a townhome would be allowed is if it was a 2-unit townhome, essentially a fee simple ownership duplex. In that case, side setbacks from another lot would be 10 feet, and that's the same in R6. So townhomes would have the same setback existing and proposed. And then just one more clarification on height. I was checking the building types again. For detached and attached homes in R6, maximum height would be 3 stories and 40 feet. For townhomes, the maximum height would be 45 feet. So just wanted to make that clarification.
So hearing that, since it's allowed under existing, I agree with you, Chair Fox.
Excellent. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? There are none. Oh, go ahead,
Can
Commissioner
I
Bennett.
just clarify, Commissioner O'Haver, I wasn't requesting a buffer. I just was asking the question because the gentleman had asked it. I wanted to just get an answer for him.
Fair enough. I was going to request some additional setback or buffer looking at this graph, but now hearing that it's allowed under existing zoning, then I'm in agreement to move forward.
There was one comment, I think, I know some of us have been seeing things maybe and maybe not. I think there was a comment about a pedestrian connection to Laurel Hills Park in the report. Was there not? No? I didn't make that up, did I?
I believe that Parks made a comment that because of the proximity to the park, there could be some additional pedestrian infrastructure that could be a part of the development. I can go back and see what those exact words are, but they did make mention just based on the proximity, it might be beneficial to have some additional pedestrian infrastructure to make that crossing easier.
I just wanted to allow Mr. Mills to respond to that, just so we could have a response on the record.
I'm looking for the specific comment as well in the staff report.
Usually highlight those things, and I didn't.
So there was a comment from Raleigh Parks about facilitating pedestrian access across Edwards Mill Road to Laurel Hills Park. Edwards Mill Road is proposed to be a 131-foot right-of-way. There's no plans for a signalized intersection at Carriage Drive in the entry to Laurel Hills. This is an NCDOT road. I would not be in favor of adding a condition to construct a pedestrian crossing across Edwards Mill Road. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good point. I mean, if it was a case for 200 plus townhomes, I would support a crosswalk, but with such a moderate increase just from R4 to R6, I don't know that's necessary.
I agree. I just, when there are issues raised, I just try to mention it so we get a response for it. So
Yeah, no, it's a good
we
good
show
point.
that we're being thorough in our examination of the cases. But I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay. Commissioner O'Haver?
So I know right at the end, Ms. Bennett just made a comment that reminded me of something I did want to ask when reviewing. I know she didn't. She didn't bring up what I'm getting ready to ask, but you just reminded me about it. Knowing it's an NCDOT road, I was looking at the distance between Carriage Drive and Marietta, and I was curious if Mr. Myers could speak to just confirming that a driveway or multiple driveway location along Edwards Mill is going to work technically from what DOT requirements are, and would that impact what happens on Carriage Drive?
Unfortunately, it is probably not that simple of an answer. Absent actually reviewing a site plan, I don't think that I can give you a definitive answer. What I can tell you is the driveway spacing standards for a driveway from Carriage Drive or from another driveway is 200 feet. And I believe that the width of this lot is about 270 or 280 feet. So we could meet 200 feet from Carriage Drive, about here. But that would violate driveway spacing here. On the contrary, and then on the other side, on Carriage Drive, the driveway spacing would be 150 feet, which would put it about there, which isn't their property. So given that they're, the way that the driveway spacing is enforced is to the extent that it's possible, it is enforced strictly, and then there's some kind of engineering considerations about what's appropriate after that. Because it is not possible for neither NCDOT nor the city of Raleigh to prohibit access for a given property. And given that DOT has control of Edwards Mill, they're going to be very much in control of that discussion. What I would imagine to be the case is potentially a driveway kind of looping like that had access to both near the edge of, as far as possible on Carriage, but then also providing an additional point of access there. But that does not mean that that's the only possible way to design the site, and with absent a site plan, we can't really evaluate, clearly what that would look like.
Understood. One more just quick question. What this image isn't showing is Marietta Court just to the south of that, which again, it's about 330 feet between Carriage Drive and Marietta Court. So what you just proposed coming off of Carriage and looping back out onto Edwards Mill, there'd be no issue with the driveway to the south on the east side of Edwards Mill Road.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just drew here where that public street is of the other side. It may be the idea of meeting driveway spacing as near as possible would put that midpoint between the two.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you saying, though,
into designing a site that
understood.
Is not really
what I'm hearing you saying, though, is that there's going to need to be some concessions made along Edwards Mills Road, but the city would not allow. It's not going to meet standards on Carriage Drive.
It doesn't meet standards on either, and I think that possibly what could happen is DOT may say, no, you're not getting a driveway at all on Edwards Mill, and the applicant would then have to, or the developer would then have to find a way to make it work from Carriage only. And I can't quite presume what NCDOT would do. I was stating how the city's standards would apply and where it may go through review process with NCDOT's district office.
Okay. Thank you.
If there are no other questions or comments, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Rains?
Thanks, Chair Fox. For case Z7522, I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated November 22nd, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Rains has offered a motion for approval of Z7522. Commissioner Miller has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. That concludes our discussion items today. Moving on to other business, we have approval of the minutes. Minutes from the November 8th Planning Commission meeting are included in the backup. Do we have any additional comment or edits to the minutes?
I emailed staff, but just to put it on the record, it has a list that says that I made comments, but I was absent, so that comment will be struck. I think it was a holdover from the last meeting where I discussed that item.
Excellent. So in addition to that edit, any others? Then I will motion to approve with that edit.
Second.
And by show of hands, those in support? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Okay, now I'm moving on to other business and report from the chair. I have no report because it's 12:03. Report of members. Would we like to go down the line and discuss perhaps in her absence? I will say strategic planning has a meeting on November 29th at 3 p.m. We would really like to have a quorum at that meeting so we could hold it because this is a meeting that had to have been rescheduled. So after that, I'll just go down the line.
There will be no committee of the whole meeting in December, and I hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving.
No report.
No meeting of infrastructure and mobility in December, and happy Thanksgiving.
No report for me.
No report.
I guess I'd like to confirm with staff, we do not have a text change meeting on December 21st, or do we?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Yep. Thanks.
Well done. Okay. Next, on to a report from the Assistant Director, Mr. Crane.
Thank you. Just very quickly, you've got a report in your backup material that lists action on all of the cases that have moved through the Planning Commission. Again, I would just note it's a fairly sizable list of work, and I continue to commend the Commission for your continued review of these cases in a timely manner. I would also like to note that your last meeting of the year is December 13th. So staff had it teed up where you had 4 discussion items. That was your holiday gift from us. You have changed that a bit because you've deferred a couple of items, so now we've got 8 total items at that agenda, but I'm confident we can get through it. And then finally, just want to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody, and we'll see you in December.
Thank y'all for.
We'll see you next week for Strategic Planning Committee.
Because it'll be great and full of strategery.
Thank y'all, Travis and Shanitha and Bynum, for all your hard work too. So thank you.
All right. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, that concludes our meeting.